Hi guys, it's Kelly here and I'm back with another video. Today we are using some items from the new release from Tonic Studios from their Winter Wonderland, and that's actually the title of that stencil, and then this is Snowman Snuggles, is one of the new stamp sets. They're super generously sized stamps, which is awesome. I loved these two little snuggly snowmen, and I wanted to put them in a scene, but here was my struggle. Okay, stencils, you guys know, I'm all about the stamping, the building of the scenes, everything. And there's another one that came out, I think it's called Santa's Little Town or something like that. I don't know. It's adorable. And I could have used that one. And in fact, I will, I'm sure, at a later date, use that one to build a scene. But I really, really loved the stencil. Like, it was so cute with the little cabin and the trees, and so I really wanted to use it. And so today we're going to be using the stencil a little bit differently than you would normally do. But before we get into that, we're going to color up these little snowmen. So obviously snowmen are white, so all we're doing is adding the shading to give them a little bit more roundness and a little bit more depth. So that's all I'm doing here. I've picked a couple of grays. And at first they're going to look really dark. Once we start adding in the other colors, it will look more white, less gray. They won't look quite as dirty, like they were made with dirty snow. So the majority of the shading is going to be where their two bodies are meeting. And since the snowman on looking at it, my right, is set to the front, the majority of the shading will be on the snowman on the left because he's pushed to the back. And then I'm just going to blend that out, leaving lots of white area because, again, we're just adding those shadows. And then moving on to the rest of their little outfits. Here I did go back in with a blender, so like a colorless blender, which is in the depths and shadows set. That's always an option for you. If you're coloring something white or you're trying to leave an extreme highlight and it gets, like, you feel like the coloring gets a little darker, gets a little out of control, like, don't sweat it. Just go back in there with your colorless blender and move some of that color around to get the lighter color that maybe you're looking for. I opted to go with some blue violets. I just thought that it would look nice with the way that I planned on doing the snow, because I have a tendency when I do my snow, yes, you can shade white snow with just gray, but oftentimes I like to do it with a blue violet or a lighter blue, just to make it a little bit more interesting. So as far as shadows are concerned here, you're going to be looking at underneath her arm, underneath her scarf, and then for the hat, I added it to the left and right hand sides, leaving that highlight in the center. And for the little pom-pom, I just put the shading where it's connected to the rest of her little winter hat. So not a ton of shading going on here, but those are just the areas. I'm not using a light source. I'm just doing it as if it's a center highlight. So what that means is if they were standing directly in front of a light and it was hitting them directly from the front. So once I work from my lightest color out to my darkest color, I'll go back in from my darkest color into my lightest color. The marker sets for Nuvo make this super simple because they give you pretty much they give you your blending groups. There's not really a whole lot of decisions that you have to make. Now that doesn't mean that you can't mix and match them, because you certainly can mix and match different parts of sets. But if you are a beginner or you question being able to pick colors that will provide good dimension, these sets are good because they do the hard part for you. So I wasn't really sure as far as like the accent color for her accessories, what I wanted to do. I wanted something that was going to stand out, but I chose the yellow to begin with, and you'll see at the end of the day I end up changing this. But I chose the yellow because it would be a complement to that blue violet. Yellow's complementary color is actually purple, so I knew they would work well together. And I'm going to have at least bare minimum 4 different colors in this because they each have on their little jackets, and then they each have accessories as well. So for that shading, we're going to be looking at the part where it's tied for sure, because those two objects coming together. And then really on the hat, just kind of the left and right hand side, the piece of scarf that's tucked underneath will be darker. And then I just picked an orange to just color in their nose. I didn't do any other shading with that. And then on the flip side, I will do the same thing for his outfits. So I'm a little bit like, what is happening? We're already doing Christmas cards. But also, the weather here is finally changing. We had a sweltering October, which for me is no issue whatsoever. Like, the longer summer lasts, the happier that I am. But I know a lot of people were kind of upset that it was the first week of October and it was still like 80 degrees outside. I was not. But in doing that, with the weather change coming, over the summer I had purchased Peanut one of those inflatable pools, but like it's adult sized. So you blow up the top ring, fill it with water, and then it's enough for pretty much the whole family to fit in. It's not super deep. Peanut could stand up in it. But it does on very, very warm days, since I'm in a rental and can't have a real pool, was kind of a nice break. We did not use it as much as I thought we would. Straight up. That's the truth. But nonetheless, once summer came to an end, that had to be cleaned up and packed up. So Eric started draining it, I think on a Friday, with just it has like a hose, where you attach the hose and then let all the water out that way. But then once it was all done, it has to be cleaned. Like, it can't just be packed that way. First of all, the bottom outside, like, has been sitting in the dirt and dead grass, that was underneath it and all that stuff. But then also the inside needs to be scrubbed out as well. So when I rented this house, I did not realize it does not have an outside spigot. I did not know that because I have never seen a house that didn't have one. I'm going to be honest. So I was a little bit shocked when last summer I realized that there was no outside water source whatsoever. So in order to fill the pool, which was the only time we've really used the water, because my washer and dryer are at the back of the house, Eric just detached the washer, like the hose, hooked up the regular garden hose, and then we ran that out the door, and that's how we filled up the pool. So our game plan to wash it was to do the same thing. Now, there's no really good place to wash this thing. We're just going to have to do it in the driveway. We know that. We have sponges, we have buckets, we're ready to go. Eric detaches the hose, hooks up the garden hose. We go outside, start spraying everything down. He and I are like hands and knees in the driveway on top of this smell. I mean, I cannot even tell you the smell, y'all. It smelled like a farm, from like the dead grass underneath. Like the outside is what smelled like it. It was potent. But Peanut wants nothing to do with this because it smells so bad. And so he's filling up the buckets with the soap and spraying the grass off the driveway and blah, blah, blah. So at some point, he says, I'm going to run in and get whatever. I don't even know what he was, honestly. I have no idea what he's going in there to get. And then he opens the door and he says, Mommy, the house is flooding. And I was like, what are you talking about? So Eric and I go over there, and sure enough, the garden hose that's attached to the water, it is spraying water everywhere. And it has been spraying water everywhere for the entirety of the time that we have been out there. It's all over the walls. It's all over my washer and dryer, front and back, everything that was on top of it. There's so much water that's pooled in the back hallway laundry area. It's actually starting to run into my kitchen. The house is literally flooding. He was right. Like, he was not an overreaction. That was accurate. So, of course, we shut off the water. Wait, we're going to go back to the card for a minute. So now that all of the coloring is done, originally my game plan with the stencil was to do a much more subdued color palette. So I wanted to tone down the brightness of my colors. You can do this with any color. Some of them will take better than others, but you can do it with any color. I'm going to take like a light to medium gray, and I'm just going to go over everything I have colored. At first, you're going to be like, Kelly, that yellow looks hideous. And I will agree with you. But once everything that's colored there gets kind of dulled down with the gray layer, it won't look quite as ugly, for lack of a better term. So this is just something you can do to kind of tone down your colors if you have a limited amount of markers and they're very bright colors. This is something you can do to get another tone. So I did do this because I thought that my background was going to be a little bit more subdued. And then I added just some little white polka dots to her outfit to make it something different, a little accent to their noses, and then his hat and her pom-pom, just for something a little bit fun. And then you guys know how I roll with the outlining. I did that as well, and I used the black script pen in order to do that. Okay, so back to this flooding situation. So, of course, air turns off the water. We're trying to sop everything up with pretty much every towel I have in the house, except for my bath towels. I refused to allow them to mop up the floor with my bath towels. So all of our beach towels, things like that, towels that we had in the garage. Here with the card, I'm fussing cutting this image out. Once that is done, I'm going to take that same script pen and I'm going to just go over the edges, so that it just gives it a more polished look. If you have any jagged edges or anything like that, this will mask those. So we clean everything up, just towels upon towels upon towels upon towels, like I cannot even tell you. And then we were going to throw them in the dryer. But then, wait, now we got to go back to the card again. So here's how we're going to use the stencil a little bit differently. I'm going to take that same script pen, which is safe for alcohol markers, and I'm actually going to trace this scene onto my background. Instead of using it with ink blending or anything like that, the only part I will not trace will be the stars in the sky. We're going to hit that with some glimmer paste later on. But here I'm just going to go through and I'm going to trace all of them. Now sometimes it will be a little bit more difficult, like the lights, the little windows on the house, were a little bit more challenging to get in there and trace, but ultimately at the end of the day, I think I got the whole vibe for it, and I was good with that. And then this way, it gives me almost like a stamped image to work with for the background to do some of the alcohol coloring as well as some ink blending. So I was pretty excited about that because that's kind of my, that's my go-to for doing backgrounds, and I was excited to be able to kind of incorporate that into this, even though it's not a traditional way to use a stencil. So kind of like stretching your supplies, more bang for your buck kind of thing, which I'm also a huge fan of, you guys know. So that once that's all traced out, I'm not going to mask anything for the sky. I just didn't think it was necessary. I'm using a couple of teals and a darker blue. And then I'm just going to use the Nuvo ink blenders. I will tell you that in order to get a good result of this, your little foam pieces should be well seasoned. Trying to go in there with a clean foam piece will make it more challenging to get a good blend. And then just working in light layers, starting off the edge of the page in a circular motion, just like you would for any other ink blending. And then I'm going to do this twice, lightest to darkest, darkest to lightest, to get a really good saturation of color. So all of the towels are used. We decided we're going to put it in the dryer, then we realized that there's water running all down the back of the dryer, so kind of terrified to use it at this point. So we just spread them all over the back deck everywhere. But by this time, it's like 6 o'clock at night, and it's not all that warm out. Know what I'm saying? So we realized the seal on the hose is bad. That's really what the problem is. And so we thought it was because of the pressure that was building up with the spray attachment, because when we filled the pool, we didn't have this problem. So before we realize the seal is bad, we think it's the pressure that's building up from the sprayer. So I turn on the water while Eric takes off the sprayer, and nothing is spraying out. We're all good. So that seems to be the problem. So we go back out to doing it. I go back in to check on it, and again, we're flooding. There's water all over the place. It isn't as bad as the first time, but it isn't great either. Here, I've cut myself just like a little hill with some masking paper, and I'm using just what's left over from the darker blue color to do some masking for the little snow hills that we've got going on here. Because I want the white edge for it to look like snow, but I do want there to be some dimension, some interest going on in the background, and then I'll use that same one to just go around the edges of the card. So then once that's done, that's going to be all of the ink blending that I'm going to do for the background, and then I'm going to get into the coloring of everything. I did not state in the lines. Let me just go ahead and say that. That was on purpose. So for the trees, I've colored in not just the part that I outlined, but the spaces in between as well. I knew I was going to be adding some white snow on top of it. So I just wanted them to look full. I wasn't really worried about them looking like they were inside the lines. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the snowmen are supposed to be the focal point. But it is nice to have them on a pretty background. Know what I'm saying? So anywho, so now it is flooding again. We cleaned that up pretty much with sopping wet towels. I mean, we had used what we had used. It just, was what it was. And then we're filling up the buckets. We're just filling up the buckets in the kitchen, taking them outside, rinsing and washing with the buckets back and forth. And Eric's like, we're going to have to rinse this thing before we lay it outside to, lay it out to dry. So what are we going to do here? So what he ends up doing is totally rigging it with duct tape. And it worked. Like, to his credit, it totally worked. He wrapped so much duct tape around that seal that there was no way any water could get out. So that is how we ended up being able to finish the pool. And then obviously we laid it out to dry in the garage. And then later, 2 days later or something, after it was all dried out, we ended up ultimately putting it away. But so now I have no, even the way, the workaround for having no outside spigot that we came up with doesn't work because it almost flooded my house. So yeah, it was a very challenging afternoon. Let's put it that way. It was not, it just, some days just feel like they just aren't meant to be easy. And, that's okay. Challenges build character. Or so I tell myself whenever I come across a challenge every single day of my life. Here I'm using that, I told you I like to do my snow with blue violets or some lighter blues. Here I went ahead with the blue violets because I had put that in her outfit already. And I'm just kind of outlining those hills. I'm going to blend that out with a gray so that it isn't quite so sharp. The line isn't quite so sharp, so that it looks more like snow but still has that purpley feel to it. In the center here, I'm not sure. I'm going to be honest. I'm not sure. I thought maybe they were holes in the snow. That's how I colored them. I'm not sure if they were supposed to be more part of the walkway, driveway. Not really sure what was going on with those. Here, I've pulled out just a bunch of browns, and I'm going to use that to color the cabin and then also the walkway portion of it. Now, when you look at the shading, it's not going to be perfect, guys. I'm just going to be straight up honest with you. It's not going to be perfection, but I didn't, how do I explain this? The background already wasn't perfect. You see what I'm saying? It was already made to be a more whimsical, less realistic background because of the way that I used the stencil. So it would have looked awkward if I tried to make the coloring super realistic and perfect in the background. So it's really just, like I said, it's just more whimsical, a little bit of shading here and there, so that things don't look flat. But ultimately, at the end of the day, this portion of it, even though I think it came out super cute, I think the background could stand on its own as a card without the addition of the snowmen. It would just be a different feel. You know what I'm saying? Like the card would just have a different feel. So I'm going to add some shading to these. I'm going to add darker colors, lighter colors, just to kind of break up what those stones look like. I don't know if you've, looked at any stone walkways lately, but they are not typically all the same thing when you have them in this type of style, where they're kind of all spread out and they're all different sizes and shapes. I was not happy with the way that the one was blending, and so I'm going to use the good old tip-to-tip method, which basically just means you take your lighter marker, touch it to the tip of your darker marker, and then use that to do some blending. It gives you kind of like a mid-tone in between so that the shading goes a little bit smoother. And so I did use that for a couple of the stones. And then I'm going to go back in with the grays and add a little bit more dimension to that pathway, as well as color, words are hard, color the roof on the little cabin in the background. And then here's where that, like I told you, I thought that maybe they were just like footsteps, or, some, like where snow had melted off the trees and maybe fallen into the snow. I thought that maybe that's what those were. I'm still not 100% positive. Don't take my word for it. I'm actually going to have to go look at what the other members of the design team did, because sometimes you just, like, when you look at something, you don't see it the way everybody else sees it, and then once somebody points it out to you, you're like, that's so obvious. Why did I not see that previously? And that happens to me a lot. So for the adding of the shading, I've picked some, I wouldn't say dark, mid to light grays, and I'm just adding some shading to one side of it. So for me, it's always the bottom left-hand side. If you watch my videos, you know that's how I roll. And then I'm going to blend that out. I did still want that warmer brown color underneath it, because typically with walkways like this, there is some melted snow in between them. You can still kind of see other rocks or gravel areas that's in between them. It isn't usually a one thick layer of snow kind of thing, not if you can see the stones through it. So at this point, I realize that I am not loving the less brighter colors, or necessarily the color scheme that I've chose. So I pulled out one of the teals, and I'm going back over this to help make it match the sky a little bit better. And then for hers, I actually went with the, I can't remember, the corals. I think it's like a cantaloupe color, because I didn't like the yellow. I did not like the yellow with this particular background. I just wasn't in love with it. So I did go over it with the cantaloupe. I kind of I lost my shading quite a bit, because with yellows it was already hard. So I did have to go back in and kind of reshade that with a darker coral color, but that was no big deal. It just took a little bit of time. Once that's done, I'm going to go back in with the stencil. I've lined everything back up, and then I'm going to use a combination of tape and masking tape to mask off the parts that are already colored, because I don't want to get the glimmer paste on that. And then I'm just going to use the clear to do the stars. So that way there's like, you know, the shimmery shinies, all that stuff. Be careful here. You want to make sure that you're only getting it on that area. And I actually didn't even have to like dip into the bottle because there was enough on my little foam seal that I just pulled it right off of there and then slathered it on. The great thing about the clear is it picks up the color of whatever's underneath it, which I love. It's by hands down my favorite glimmer paste. Even though the colored ones are beautiful, this one is just so versatile. It's my super favorite. If you've watched my videos before with me using glimmer paste, you know that I will tell you go wash your stencil right away. When it dries, it's much more difficult to get off. Speaking of drying, I set that aside to dry overnight, and then we're back at it again. I'm going to go in with just a white gel pen and start adding snow to the trees as well as the cabin. Just adding that right on top of the top black line. And because then it dries opaque, I feel like somebody's going to tell me it's a K. I know, I'm saying it with a K. I know it doesn't sound like that, but I am. Opaque. Anywho, then I'm just using the glitter gloss to go right over those white areas so that the snow is shiny. I'm going to pop my snowman up on some foam, just so that it has a little bit of dimension, and then adhere that down at the edge of the path, so you can still see the little cabin and all the trees and everything like that. And then for the sentiment, I'm going to do just a black embossed label, just white on black. So I'm going to stamp that in some clear sticky ink, and after I've treated it with an anti-static tool. Can we quickly, because it's going to be very quickly, let's talk about this dot manicure I got going on. I asked people on Instagram what they thought about it, and some people loved it, some people were just like meh, and some people were like, no, absolutely not. I'm a meh person. Peanut didn't like it. Eric didn't have an opinion. But basically it's just a series of dots like on the edge of your fingernails of different colors. I do think that it is fun. I think it would be more fun for something like New Year's, where you would maybe have like black, white, silver, all that jazz. But I don't love it with the fall colors. So I would be interested to hear what your opinion is on the dot manicure, if you think it's fun or not. So after that was all embossed, I trimmed it down and then popped it up on the foam. Once I get it straight, which took me a hot second there, then that's it. That's the entire card, the little scene here with snowmen. I think they're totally adorable. I will link below if you want to go check out Tonic's new release, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye.